I'm live 1 minute ahead of schedule. Hey, welcome. And I want to say Happy New Year, but I feel kind of compelled to say wishing you a warm, prosperous, healthy, and happy New Year. It's been kind of a wild entry into 2022, and I just wish all of you the best with it. And I know it's been quite a struggle for a lot of people over this holiday. So stay well and be safe. So I'm Karen Valencic. I'm the creator of Spiral Impact Method. And this webcast, this live stream, my topic is probably something really unusual for you to hear about. It's clarity, how you can solve issues by setting them aside. And, a lot of people like me are out there touting words for the year or a theme for the year or a resolution for the year. You know, I I've tried those, I've done those, but what I do every day is just try to do the best of honoring myself and other people. So that's what I do, and I try to be consistent year round. So that's where I am. But around the new year, what I really enjoy is clearing out things. And it occurred to me a couple years ago that I like to clean off the desktop. I like to clean out my files. I like to even clean out my kitchen drawers. It's something that I like to start the new year with cleanliness, clearing things. And I thought to myself, that is really a great way to think about things is having clarity, which is in the context of relationships and how do we go through life. To me, it's clarity is putting aside, getting rid of those things that drag you down. And it might be a dirty kitchen drawer, but a lot of times it's other things. And that's what I wanted to talk about today is clarity. And clarity for, let's see, this is my new banner. Which is, so clarity is, so I want to talk about clarity with your inner self and with other people, another person, and actually with teams, because they're all very relevant. And how you can get solutions by setting the issues aside. And that may sound counterproductive, but I've been helping people master conflict and doing a lot of team and leadership development for decades. And I've learned a lot, and I can bear witness to those things. But let's start by, much of my work, all of my work is grounded in a martial art that I practice, which is Aikido. And I'm not going to go into details of that now, but I really like using Aikido as an example to really bring my concepts to life. And so right now, I'm by myself, and you might just be listening and not watching a video, but I want you to imagine in your mind that you have somebody has grabbed hold of your wrist and they're holding on to it really tight. And it's really kind of consuming you. And so I want to use that as a metaphor for this conversation. So now if we want to talk about our inner clarity, what are those things that kind of create inertia along our path? And for me, and I think many, many, many other people, we have our doubts, our self-doubt. We have our own fears. We have all those inner scripts that we've carried for years. And those can really create a drag on what we want to do and how we want to perform in the new year. And so it's interesting getting back to my analogy of the person grabbing your wrist. So in this case, it's you grabbing your wrist. And, for a lot of people, our own self-criticism and self-doubt can be bigger than anything else. And so, and as an entrepreneur, I've been a business owner for way over 2 decades. And I have to say that that's something that I look at on a continual basis. So what do you do about that? How do you get clarity of the self-doubt and all of that kind of stuff? So what I'm going to share with you are 2 things that I find very helpful. For one, in my body of work of spiral impact, and also in my martial arts practice, we have a concept or a practice that we call centering, which is really bringing all your focus down into your hara or your belly. And you get there through a lot of ways, and I'm not here to go through those details today, but breathing is a really good way to get there. And just noticing, where do you hold tension and relax it. Now, something really magical happens to that wrist that person has grabbed. Now, what has happened is now you're no longer focused on that wrist. That wrist grab is the issue. And so as you get centered, you're no longer just focusing on that wrist grab. And what happens actually is, as you truly get centered, it'll affect the person grabbing your wrist, which actually in this case is you. so that is one way I deal with self-doubt and my own inner critic, is recognizing that, I have total control over that, and getting centered puts me in a place of prior fulfillment. So I feel more confidence when I'm centered than when I am focused on this wrist. And the wrist really throws me off my game. Now, the other thing that I mentioned, there was two things that I find really helpful with that, with getting clarity in my inner self. The other one is recognizing the difference between inspiration and motivation. Sorry, I almost forgot that for a second. A lot of people want to get you motivated. You got to get motivated. Well, what I know to be true is there's a very big difference between motivation and inspiration. Motivation, even the roots motivation comes from the roots. You got to get your hands in there doing something. It's required on activity. But inspiration is that breathe in, is where you are really excited about what you're doing. And I'll tell you, my self-confidence, because when I started this work a long time ago, I was very fearful of speaking in front of people. But my inspiration about sharing this message really moved me through that self-doubt. And I continually revisit that. And it's a great time of year to do that, actually, is to revisit what inspires you. And I get really, I love being able to help people master conflict. That's what I love. And it's so magical to see that happen. So those are some ideas for that inner junk that gets in the way of our clarity. So how do you clear out that inner junk? Well, get centered, breathe, practice. I have a whole segment on that in my spiral impact work. But then also, are you moving from inspiration or motivation? And, and of course, there are things I do in my business that feel like I got to motivate myself to do it. And how do I do that? Is I reflect upon my inspiration, because that always brings me forth. Okay, so now let's talk about what if that clarity is dragged down by another person. And of course, I've been around a lot of people over the holiday. I've watched more TV than usual. And so I want to again think about that wrist grab. And now that other person, may be gripping your wrist so tight that you might get bruised. And that's happened to me numerous times on the Aikido mat. And you might even think, oh, this person's going to crush my bones. And because they gotcha. And compounded with that, and I didn't say this earlier, why would anybody grab your wrist in a martial art? Well, they would grab your wrist to hold you still while they punched you in the jaw. That's why a person would grab your wrist. And so perhaps in this relationship, you have history. You have history where maybe you got cracked in the jaw, and maybe you're that person that has cracked somebody in the jaw. Who knows? And again, that's a metaphor for the way we communicate. So thinking about another person and they grab hold of you and you've got a history with them. And, I truly believe, and I was talking with someone over the holidays, several people actually, when we have an issue with a person, if it feels like a really big issue, a lot of times it's not the first time. And what we end up doing is we bring in all that history of these issues that we've had with people. And I believe that drag comes from the fact that we don't know how to deal with conflict. And so we get all this residual internal anxiety and anger and righteousness over how we feel we've been done wrong. And it really kind of boils back to our own responsibility in standing up for ourselves and actually dealing with conflict in a way that is appropriate. And that is my life's path, is how do you master conflict? And it takes two to have dysfunctional conflict. And so just keep that in mind. So what do you do with that is recognize that, and ask yourself, how are my conflict skills? Could I learn something here? And I'll tell you, I've studied this for 30 years and I continue to learn new things. And again, this is about, what about setting aside the issue so you can actually move on and get a resolution? So solving issues by setting aside the issue. And that might sound weird, but again, when we get caught in that wrist grab, all our focus goes to that grab. I can't believe you said that to me. Your views on this are really wrong. We get caught in the issue, and all we're focused on is that issue, which is represented by their grabbing my hand. And in people's case, it's exaggerated by that punch that's coming. And so while I could actually spend hours and years talking to you through what those things can be, what I want in this short live stream, I'd like to just say, recognize when you get caught up in that issue. You're caught in the issue and that person owns you right now. And again, getting back to center, but even more importantly, thinking through, what is your intention in this relationship? What's your intention in this relationship? And what do you want to do with it? What's the outcome that you'd like to have? Perhaps it's not the best relationship for you. How do you vocalize that? And as I mentioned a minute ago, over the holidays, I've probably watched more TV, and I think, when we think about conflict, and if you work in an organization, keep this in mind. Where do most people learn their conflict skills is they learn them through their family, which, I don't know about you, but I haven't seen a huge number of very functional families when they're dealing with conflict, or they learn from our media and our entertainment. Well, even comedy, situational comedies. And I never watched Seinfeld when I was in the 90s, and I've been watching Seinfeld on Netflix, and it almost kind of agitates me at times, because it's like they just dig themselves in a hole, and while it's funny to the rest of us, that's not how we really want to live our lives, is it? So clarity, clean up your part of those relationships. And again, thinking about the intent that you have in that relationship is a good first start. But if you're just going to focus on, ain't it awful? They got my wrist, ain't it awful? They've hit me before, ain't it awful? It gets really boring, and it doesn't really get you where you want to go. So set that aside. And what's really nice about those things, if you can set it aside for right now, and that doesn't mean forget about it. It means don't let it own you. Don't let it own you. And if you can do some other things in there, it actually moves you to a point where you can actually have a really real conversation around those topics. And oftentimes what you'll find, it's not even the issue you thought it was. So I hope that's clear. I don't know if I've got any questions up here. Let me see if I do. Okay. I don't see any questions, so maybe I'm being totally clear. But now I want to move on to teams. And then again, getting back to my martial arts metaphor. So we started out with, yourself grabbing your wrist and you're kind of beating yourself up and losing your center to that, to one other person grabbing your wrist really hard and then perhaps having a history of getting slugged. But now we're in a team where there's multiple people, a lot of history, and a lot of different dynamics that go on, because every one person that you add into a team adds a different complexity to the personality of the team. And so often those cultures, those team relationships are left to randomness, whoever the strongest personality is. And I write about that. But I will tell you, some of the most gratifying work that I have done in my 20 plus years of doing this work is working with some teams that have really difficult relationships. Some to the point that they can't hardly get together because they cry. And that's just a heartbreaking thing. Now, what's always surprising to people is I never, ever, 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 ever go in to talk about the issues. Because if I do that, you know what happens? They go down the crap hole is what they do. It doesn't move them anywhere, because when you focus on that issue, again, it's just like focusing on the grab. It just makes it bigger. When you think about it, if someone's grabbed your wrist and you're trying to get away from it, they grab tighter, don't they? And then in a team, maybe it's not just one wrist, two wrists. Maybe somebody's got an arm around your neck trying to choke you. I mean, it could, or it might feel that way. So again, that's a metaphor. So what do you do with that? What do I do with that? And I have had great success working with some teams, and we can get to those kumbaya moments, but I have to say it's heavy work. And what I always start with is teaching people spiral impact, which is how to master conflict. And then I move them on to thinking about their intention, engaging them in some really future-focused conversation around what do they want as a team? What do they want as a team? And that dialogue is so exciting, and people really can get around looking at the future and what they want and what they wish and all those things. And from there, we can actually move to some agreement around how they work together. It's really exciting, and then create a support mechanism around that. But if you start at the level of the issue, you will always make the issue bigger. And oftentimes that's where things implode and fall apart. Now, when I work with teams that have big conflict, some people might choose and do choose to leave those teams, and that's fine. You can't always get every person to be on board with what it is, but it's pretty exciting. So when I say solving issues by setting them aside, I hope you can see that what we've done here is with the martial arts thing and the wrist grab, you can get stuck in that, and you just dig yourself in, and you struggle, and you get at wit's end, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. And maybe you've been in some kind of physical aspect like that. Most people haven't, but that struggle just makes your opponent or your friend work harder at it. And so thinking about setting aside the issue, you let that go. And when you let that go, because again, people don't struggle unless there's a struggle. And so it only takes one person to change that dynamic. And again, this is a big concept for a short talk, but I want you to be thinking about that. What is it that's grabbing you as we begin this year? And can you get to clarity? And again, that was not misspelled. It was spelled intentionally with Clearity, because it's a state of being where we've got rid of those things that drag us down. And the beautiful thing about setting aside issues to resolve them is they always end up getting looked at eventually, but in a whole different light, in a whole different matter that really becomes more honorable to you and to anyone else. And so I've got one comment here from Claudia. Thank you so much, Claudia, for tuning in. And that's all I got for right now. If you would like to explore this further, and I'm going to go back to my banners here. I'm getting good with this. Set up a time to chat. I'd love to hear what you thought about this talk. And we can schedule a quick 15-minute phone call or a longer Zoom, whatever works for you, and see how I might be able to help and how you might be able to help me. So thank you so much for tuning in, and have, again, a warm, healthy, prosperous, and happy 2022. Bye-bye.